On the new American frontier, a family is haunted by an unseen force. They came out here to stake a claim and find fortune, but what they have found is misery and woe. Physical attacks and loud noises keep them sleepless, and one of them may not make it out alive. Welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. Welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Ryan Roberts. These are my partners in the paranormal, Shelley Pruitt and Blake Smith.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, guys.
Pretty good. I just got to tell y'all, every time we played that intro, I wish y'all could see my camera like down below y'all's because I'm over here like dun, 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 dun. I'm like jamming and interpretive dancing like on my side over here.
I love it. You're doing that, and I'm making sure I don't have any I'm going, okay, everything good.
Yeah.
All right, we're good.
It's like every time
I'm trying to adjust my hat, my shirt, make sure everything's centered, so I don't look like an idiot with half my shit being cocked sideways, so.
Right.
I heard you were cocked sideways.
Hey.
As we continue our month of ferocious females.
Yes, absolutely.
We got one right in the center of the screen.
Yes, you really should go and watch the Patreon when it goes up tomorrow if you want to hear devious ways to get back at an ex.
God. Oh my God. It was pretty good.
Yeah, we found out just how devious one of us is.
Blake.
It ain't me.
Yes, it is.
No. I'm the nice one. Everybody knows I'm the nice one.
This is true.
This is true.
This is true. Yeah, this is true.
Which really makes me and Blake look like serious assholes.
Yes, it does. Brian, what are we talking? What are you bringing us tonight?
All right. Well, continuing on the month of furious females. Was it furious females?
Ferocious.
This one might be kind of furious.
Well,
too.
Some of them are pretty mad too. They're kind of
some of them are pretty mad. Tonight we're going to be talking about one of the most famous hauntings in American history. We're going to be talking about the Bell Witch.
Yes.
So I think maybe because it's going to be a little bit of a journey, so maybe we should just jump right into it.
Go for it.
Let's go. I'm ready.
All right.
Let's talk about the Bell Witch.
All right. So the Bell Witch is one of the most famous hauntings in American history and one of the most well-documented hauntings in American history, especially for its time period, because, the haunting occurred between the years of 1817 and 1820 and a little bit after that, but we'll get into that later. And this case is one of the rare cases where someone may have actually been killed by a spirit. So before we get to that, we're going to have to back it up a little bit. And we're going to have to start actually in my home state, North Carolina, because the Bell family, who are the focus of this American epic, begin their life in the state of North Carolina. And John Bell married his wife, Lucy, in 1782 when he was 32 and she was 12, and which is not cool, but at the time was...
That fact elude me. Wow.
Yeah. Say which is not
not unusual for the
Yeah.
time period
But
though.
for the
Whenever
time
the life
period,
expectancy was only like what 42. I mean,
Oh yeah,
you got to get them 12-year-olds smothered.
yeah. You
Oh,
made it.
yuck.
You only made it to about 42 to about 40, and you were considered old at that point.
Yeah.
But he married her in 1782, and they had a 323-acre farm in Edgecombe County, North Carolina, which is close to modern day Rocky Mount. And if anybody's ever been out there, they ain't jack shit out there. And ain't nothing but farmland to this day. And so John Bell and his family, they had this 323-acre farm. They raise cotton, corn, and tobacco, and things are good. They're very wealthy. They have a lot of money. And then things become not so good. Like the land starts to turn and the crops start to fail year after year. And then John's livestock contracted disease, and so did his mules. And the land for them and their family.
You mean his ass got sick?
Yeah, his ass got sick as hell.
Okay.
so then
resist, you guys. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
so him and his family and some other people in the community decided, you know what? Let's just get out of here. There is fortune to be made out west, because at this point, past the Appalachian Mountains, like in Tennessee, was considered the frontier.
Right.
And in the Tennessee territory, there were people going out there settling all the time. And John Bell and his family are like, look, things have turned bad here. Let's get out of here. There's this land out in Tennessee that we can get. Let's go start over. So him and his family make the trek out towards the Red River area, which is near modern day Adams, Tennessee. Now, kind of a little fun side story, on their way out there, they actually experienced what could be considered their first paranormal experience, because they are traveling through the Linville Gorge in North Carolina, and they see the Brown Mountain Lights. Now, we will cover the Brown Mountain Lights on another show. And, you know, I've seen the Brown Mountain Lights myself. People as far back as the Bells and even further back than the Bells had seen the Brown Mountain Lights. And they actually read about it in one of their journals, and were talking about how crazy it was that they saw this on the way out through North Carolina to Tennessee. Well, the Bells cut across the mountains, and they make it out to the Red River area in Tennessee. Now, the Red River area of Tennessee was actually considered very sacred land to Native Americans. And on the plot of land that the Bells decided to settle on, there were actually a couple of Indian burial mounds that the Bells came across, but they didn't really bother, except for one of the children at one point goes and digs up a couple of bones, being a kid. Not a good thing, which could contribute to what happens to them later on.
But there was no malicious intent.
There was no malicious intent. No.
It was a kid, and I kind of almost give a pass of that, because a kid doesn't understand about being reverent and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of times, if you have something to do with that, that becomes the intent. If the intent is the hell with it, we don't care who was here before. Yeah. This is a kid just messing around. It's like, look, I found a skull. Yeah. Oh hell, put that shit back.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing? No, put that back. You know, as a kid being a kid, he didn't have any malicious intent. He just was digging with his buddies, you know, and found something. Hey, look, Mom, this is cool. I found this, you know. But
Brian, you've said that before when you were little. Look at this, Mom.
Yeah. You've had a lot of practice.
I saw a glimmer of your childhood right then.
A lot of practice on that. Yep.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was gonna say you can ask my mom, but you can.
Yeah, sweet Melissa. She'll tell all your secrets.
Oh yeah, she will. Don't ask her, because she will. She will blab it. No.
Melissa,
love you, Mom. but by 1816, you know, the Bells had come out here, and what I was going to say too is John Bell and his family actually took care not to disturb the Indian burial mounds. Just their son did it at one point. And by 1816, the Bells had actually turned things around. They became very wealthy again. They were well respected in their community. Everyone in the community loved John Bell. They liked him a lot. They knew he was a very God-fearing and a very hospitable man. And he would take care of people in the area if they asked. And everyone loved him except for one person in the area. And her name was Kate Batts. And she happened to live right next door to John Bell. Now, to give you a little bit about Kate Batts was a 40-year-old woman. And this is her in the picture. She was a short, stout woman, as you can tell. And she actually became the head of her household and the runner of her farm that backed up to the Bell farm, because her husband had a tree fall across his legs and it crushed his legs. So she had to take over.
Ooh.
And the thing about Kate was Kate was kind of a modern woman in not ancient, but like olden times, so
ferocious female. She was outspoken. Yes. She ran her mouth.
She did. She ran her mouth, but the thing is like, she kind of had to be that way because with her being the head of a farm and being a female, a lot of the farmers in the area, when they were trying to work out land deals with her, or trying to work out like buying crops and buying things, would try to screw her over.
Yeah. They thought they could get one over on her.
But Kate did not suffer fools lightly, and she would call someone out on their bullshit like that. So the fact that she would do so had people in town like saying, oh, Kate must be a witch because look at her. She's standing up to these men. So she's got to be a witch, But the thing about Kate is Kate did not help her situation as far as that goes. But Kate did not help her situation as far as that goes because Kate would do some kind of witchy things a little bit, or what was considered witchy at the time. Whenever she would meet a new woman or meet women in town, she would ask for like a brass pin from them. And according to superstition at the time, if you had a brass pin, you could use it, you could curse it and use it to control somebody. So
why a brass pin?
I don't know. It's just one of those weird, like old wives' tales. It's just a weird.
Oh, okay, so we're saying a brass pin. Would that be like a hat pin for your hat?
I'm guessing, or maybe like something that would like hold some, or like something that would hold.
Well, you
your,
couldn't
like,
unhook something that held your underdrawers up because then your underdrawers would fall down. I would be thinking a brass pin would maybe, if somebody knows what a brass pin is, please pop that up on the screen for us, because my first thought is like a hat pin. Because if you think about it, long stick, because those old hat pins were very long, very thin, some of them very expensive. And if you can find some today, they're very rare to be intact. And my mother used to have some of those brass hat pins.
Says by definition that it could be considered a brass pin, or what some would call a button.
Okay, so like to.
So maybe a
listen,
button.
Now
from
that could get a woman in a lot of trouble if she took something off up here. Harlot.
I mean, and the thing is I don't know if anybody ever actually gave her one, because people were like, I don't know about that. I mean, you got a reputation of being a witch, and I'm not giving you nothing off of me. But she would always ask. She was known to ask people for these things. And there was also an incident where I'm just going to call it the butter incident. So follow me on this. This is going to, like, I'm just going to have to tell you. So there was a girl who lived close to Kate Batts. And one day this girl is churning butter, and her butter's just not making. She's churning her cream, make her butter.
So dirty.
That sounds horribly dirty.
My butter ain't making.
I'm not making no butter. So she's churning her butter, and the cream is not turning into butter. Now, she lives close to Kate Batts, and there was an actual book that came out in the 1600s, or not the 1600s, but in the Middle Ages. It was called the Malleus Maleficarum. And the Malleus Maleficarum was called the Witch's Hammer. And it was literally like a list of how you know a witch lives close to you or you're in the presence of a witch. And one of the things in the Malleus Maleficarum was that witches could curse butter churns to make sure you don't have butter. And this belief carried over into the Old South and into because we're not too far removed from the New World at this point. So a lot of these people are bringing over these beliefs over from Europe. And so the girl decides, well, I live next to Kate Batts, and she's known to be a witch, so she had to curse my butter churn. So what she does is she goes to the fire, she gets a hot poker, takes a hot poker and sticks it in the cream in her butter churn. And she's like, so I'm going to go see if it did anything to Kate, because Kate had to have enchanted my butter churn. So she goes over to Kate's house. And she sees Kate come out onto the porch, and Kate is actually nursing a burnt hand. She burned her hand somehow. So in this girl's mind, she puts two and two together. So this must mean Kate is a witch. So this rumor gets around to the whole town. So this all further builds the case to everyone in town that Kate Batts is actually a witch. So.
Okay. So if you want to uncurse your butter churn, you stick a hot poker in it?
I guess so. I don't know. That was just one of those old wives' tales things.
It couldn't be that she just sucked at churning butter. It was
no.
That would have been my thought.
Mine too, but no, Kate Batts had to be a witch, y'all. Obviously.
Okay. So we're assuming that at this time period that this lady could read, and that had actually gotten a hold of this book and was able to even say the words that you said and understand the words, and now was able to interpret that now our neighbor, got to be a witch because I can't turn butter. What?
I mean, at this point too, it could have just been, one of those things that kind of carried over. It could have been, oral tradition, like, if you got a witch close by,
traditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this girl decides that Kate's a witch. She goes and tells the whole town, and the town's like, oh yeah, obviously she's a witch. So that's kind of like the reputation that Kate is carrying at this point. Now she begins feuding with John Bell. And what happens is Kate's husband is hurt. John Bell knows she lives next door, and John Bell's like, hey, let me buy some land off of you. I know you're going through a tough time. Just let me buy some land. Here's some money. It'll get you through for a little while. And Kate is actually like, no, I don't want to buy land. I don't want you to buy my land. How about this? How about you trade me for a slave, and then you give me a loan and I'll pay you the loan back? And John Bell's like, okay, deal. So John Bell draws up a contract. Both Kate and John Bell sign this contract. However, John Bell does not indicate the amount of interest he wants on this property, on this contract. So when Kate Batts goes to pay John Bell back, he's like, well, okay, well, you also owe me this amount of interest. And it was a huge amount of interest. And I couldn't find the exact amount of interest it was, but it was enough to where Kate Batts got pissed off and was like, you didn't.
I had heard through a couple of articles that it ranged around the 20 to 25% interest on top of what she owed him, which, I mean, yeah, back in that time, that's a lot. That's a lot of extra
today's
money.
time. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to right off the bat debate you on a little something, Ryan.
Go ahead.
From what I read, John Bell was not a nice man. In fact, in the place he lived prior, he was actually a member of the church. I don't know, alderman or something. He was high up in the Baptist church standings. And one of the reasons they said he moved was because he was accused of being a usury, which would have been someone who charged outrageous amounts of interest. And his reputation and good name was messed up, which is why he moved, not only because he was having difficulties with his farm, but to escape that he was actually excommunicated from that Baptist church. Now, I didn't know Baptists could be excommunicated, but okay.
What I was going to say is actually Kate is the one that gets him charged with usury from his church in Tennessee, because she hounds him for a good 5 years about, like, anytime his name is brought up in public, anytime she's around anyone, she's just like is adamant John Bell, is a loan shark, which that's what usury means basically. He's a loan shark. He did this to me, did that to me, and to the point where that Baptist church that was established in that community actually excommunicates John Bell, and John Bell has to start going to another church in town because he can't go to that one anymore because he's been accused of usury.
But he was also accused in North Carolina, as far as I know. This is a pattern that seems to have followed him.
The thing in North Carolina that I found is someone also accused him of killing some overseer on his plantation.
Yes, he did. He was accused of that.
That's also, no one can find anything to substantiate that from what I've read.
Well, most of the overseers, that if they were trusted enslaved people, there would be no record of it. And we did know that he had enslaved people.
He did. He had quite a few, and so did Kate next door.
So, of course, that was something that was unfortunately standard for the time.
Absolutely.
Successful
unfortunately.
Plantations and farms you utilize human labor.
Yeah. And God, that's a lot to pack up and move and get into this new area, and so whatever happened to John Bell in North Carolina must have been real serious for them to just get up and get out of there.
Yeah.
So since John Bell starts going to a new church, has to go to another church, he goes and actually ends up getting into a fight with Kate at this particular church in front of the whole congregation.
He decided he's going to go to Kate's church.
I mean,
sounds like mistake number 2, 3,
maybe
4.
she wasn't welcome at the Baptist church that John Bell was at, so maybe she was welcome at the other church in town.
And you thought that's the only one John's welcome at too?
Yeah, now, you
Come
got a couple
on in,
of
you
people.
pious prick.
So on the Sunday right before the hauntings began, John Bell and his family are at church one Sunday morning. Now, this particular Sunday morning, there was a traveling evangelist that was at the church, and this evangelist was preaching fire and brimstone, and he was up front saving souls. And one of the parishioners gets up out of the pew and walks up to the front of the church, and he begins to holler and confess his sins and starts rolling on the ground. Now, Kate comes into the church late, and Kate was known for always being at church every Sunday, but she was also known for coming in very late every Sunday. So even though she was there, she'd always come in and, make a scene that, hey, I'm here at church now.
She wanted to make an entrance.
And so she came in late, and this is what she sees happening in front of the congregation. Now, Kate also had a reputation for trying to be center of attention whenever she was around people. So what Kate sees this dude rolling around on the floor in front of the whole church, she walks up to the front of the church, hikes up her skirt, and sits on this man's chest in front of the whole congregation. And people are just kind of like,
well, that's not very ladylike.
Well, she wasn't. She also had a reputation for not being very ladylike too.
Oh, nobody ever accused her of being a lady?
No, not at all.
Nobody's ever accused me of that either. We're in good company.
So everyone sees this happen, and they're kind of looking at each other like, what is she doing? Like, we were having a good old fashioned like church service, and here she comes in, and she's going to sit on this man in front of everybody. There's children here. What is happening here? And the man, because as we know, Kate was kind of a short, stout. She was built. She was a lot. She was a lot of woman. And she sat on this dude's chest, and this guy starts screaming for the Lord to help him after Kate sits on his chest. So the congregation's kind of like,
he met God. There you go. Jesus,
well, the congregation's just like, hey, could you get off the guy's chest? You're hurting him. And Kate Batts fires back, I'm helping him see the Lord.
You about to?
Yeah, if she don't get off, she's going to. So John Bell gets tired of this. John Bell stands up in the middle of the church.
Hey,
and
I don't mean to interrupt, but Paula wants to know if she was churning the butter though. Anyways,
she could have been. But so John Bell stands up in the middle of the church and points at her and starts chiding her for making a mockery of salvation, is what he says. And he also is chiding her for being late. And she looks back at him and basically fires back, well, let he who was without sin cast the first stone. And so John Bell gets pissed off and calls her a witch in front of the whole congregation.
Uh-oh.
Those are fighting words.
Now, Kate does not deny this, but she turns around and she looks at John Bell and she says, you have your land and you have your wealth, but you wait and see what sad changes come to you and your family. So the whole congregation has now seen Kate say this to John Bell. And the preacher is like, I have lost control of this situation. Church is over.
Preacher. Poor preacher.
Everybody go home. Everybody get out of here. Everybody go home. So everybody leaves and they all go back to their houses. Now, like I said, this is shortly before the hauntings on John Bell's property begins. So a few weeks later, John and his family start experiencing a bunch of crazy stuff on their property. Now, here's something to kind of keep in mind before we start getting into the haunting story is John Bell and his daughter are the ones who are particularly targeted by this haunting.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing to remember about John Bell's daughter, Betsy is 12 years old when this haunting begins. And as we're going to see, this is a lot of poltergeist activity, a lot of voices coming from all over the place. And what do we know about 12-year-old girls and poltergeist activity? So just keep that in mind as we go through the story. So in September of 1817, the haunting begins. And John Bell, the first thing that happens is John Bell is walking along his property, kind of surveying things. He's got his gun with him, because you might run into a wild animal out there somewhere. You don't know. He's got his gun with him and he's surveying his property. And on the edge of this cornfield, he looks over and he sees a big ass animal, like he said, a giant animal. And he said it had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit and its eyes were glowing. So this scares the crap out of John Bell. John Bell picks up his rifle, shoots this thing. This thing does not die. This thing does not run. This thing just disappears into thin air. And it scares the absolute crap out of John Bell. Now, I kind of want to stop down and draw a parallel between another paranormal case that we know and Shelly, you'll know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Skinwalker Ranch, which also starts, weirdly enough, with them seeing an animal that should not exist. On the Skinwalker Ranch, which is another episode that we'll do later on, they also see a big animal that they shoot that disappears. So it's kind of interesting that these two cases are kind of paralleling each other.
Now, Ryan, you're saying that John Bell reports seeing this, and I did read that John Bell had reported seeing this. However, I also found in some of the research that not only was it John Bell that reported it, some of his enslaved servants reported seeing it as well. Which, remind me when we get there, we're going to have a conversation about that too.
I believe it was one of his, because it was one of the slaves that was going to see his wife that was walking along.
Yeah, he was walking because his wife was at a neighboring plantation or farm, and he was at the Bells, and so he would travel in between to go see his wife.
He would travel in between, and he said he came across whatever this giant creature was several times as he was walking back and forth between farms. Yeah, so that's kind of the artist's rendition of what they were seeing. Now, this isn't the only strange animal that's spotted on the Bell plantation. A few weeks later, John and his son are hunting, and they see a big giant bird that should not exist because of how big it is, sitting on a fence post. And before John can shoot this thing, it flies away. Now, this is another parallel with another paranormal case, but around Mothman, people were starting to see a lot of big giant birds that should not have existed. So what is it about these crazy paranormal cases and these, for lack of a better term, cryptids or chimeras showing up? It just makes no sense. Something's kind of interesting. So a few weeks later, Betsy and her brother Drury said they were walking through the plantation and they had an apple orchard on their plantation. And as they're walking through an apple orchard, they said they kept seeing this old woman in the apple orchard who would appear and disappear. And they're telling this story to their family sitting at the dinner table. And they said that John Bell didn't say anything. He just kind of sat staring into his food as he was eating his dinner. He pushed himself away from the table, clearly disturbed, gets up, and goes to bed. So maybe he also saw this woman and just didn't want to tell anybody? Nobody really knows, but they know he was clearly disturbed at what he was hearing because, you already have these two sightings and you have like a specter showing up in the apple orchard. And then a few weeks later, Betsy and her brothers Richard and Joel were walking, and they see something green hanging from a tree on the property. And as they get closer, they see that it is a woman wearing a green dress hanging from a noose with tears running down her face. And they said that they were looking at this, and they all reported that their energy was all being drained as they had their eyes locked on this thing, and they finally somehow were able to break their gaze and take off running, and they turn around to run, and as they're running, they look back, and there's no one there. So these sightings are what kicks off the haunting on the Bell farm. Now, this was just on the land, but by Christmas of 1817, things began to happen at the house. In Christmas of 1817, they began to hear knocks on the walls and on the roof of the house. And they said it would start about 10 o'clock at night and would go till about midnight. And at first, John thinks that Kate has sent her slaves over to his plantation to mess with him and his family. So he gets out and he starts looking around to see if he can find a source for these knocks. He can't find anything. There is nowhere logically these knocks are coming from in the middle of the night. And he run around his house looking to see if he could find anybody. Couldn't find anybody. And then the kids would start to wake up because they would hear the sound of rats gnawing on their bedposts. But when they would get up to investigate the sounds, they couldn't find anything. And then the sounds would start coming from elsewhere in the house, but there was never any indication that a rat had been there. There was never any sort of like wood laying there where a rat had chewed on anything. They could not find anything. It was just these sounds that were just tormenting this family and waking them up in the middle of the night, making sure they didn't get any sleep.
And that house looked to be a log cabin, which those logs are solid. There's nothing that runs up in between them. So if they're hearing rats gnawing like in the walls, that shouldn't be happening because it's just a log.
I'm also going to tell you that I actually found this picture after Ryan, you sent me the artist's rendition of it. This is the actual home of the Bells in 1909. Well, after this took place, this is before it ended up being demolished or taken down or whatever. So this is actual photograph of the house itself.
And that's a very sizable home for its day too.
Yes,
that was practically a mansion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, so they're hearing these sounds and they go and investigate, and then they also start hearing the sounds of snarling dogs filling the home and dragging of chains. And the sounds increase to about 3 o'clock in the morning. Like because they were going for a couple hours. Now they're going from like 10 o'clock to about 3 o'clock in the morning, keeping these people up all night long. And this happens all the way until about the first of the year. And then after the first of the year, things start to get physical with the family. They would be in their bed and they would have the sheets yanked off of their bed while they were trying to sleep. And this continued to happen night after night until October of that year when Betsy began being targeted. And Betsy was in her bed when the first time it happened. She was laying in her bed. Something drags her out of her bed by her hair. And while it drags her across the floor, she's being slapped across the face by an unseen entity. And this happens for night after night after night. Something is dragging Betsy out of her bed every night and beating the shit out of her, basically. So John Bell is at the end of his rope. John Bell doesn't know what to do. He can't protect his kid. So he's like, I have to go to the church for help. So he goes to town and he seeks out the help of a Reverend James Johnston. And Johnston comes out to the plantation. And he blesses the grounds and he blesses the home and he's going to stay up. I mean, because they were kind of far from town. They were about 7 or 9 miles from town. Even then, that was a travel back then. So you have to stay overnight when you go visit people because horse and buggy don't move that fast.
Right.
And the Reverend wants to stay out there because, it's getting late, number one. And number two, he wants to see if anything happens. And that night, the Reverend is in his bed and the sheets are ripped from his bed while he's sleeping. And then Betsy is once again attacked and the home fills with the sound of snarling dogs. So the Reverend gets up the next morning and basically tells John Bell, hey, I blessed your land. I blessed your home. We'll just have to see if it takes. We'll do what we can. We'll be praying for you. When he leaves. But it doesn't stop. And in November of that year, Betsy's potential suitor named Richard Powell shows up to the house. And this is shortly after the Reverend leaves. And when he shows up, he is basically showing up to court Betsy. Now, he is also Betsy's school teacher, and he's about 31 years old. And,
there's something wrong with that.
Yes. He has fallen in love with Betsy, and he wants to come talk to the parents about courting Betsy. But he also comes to talk about Betsy's education to the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And and he is in the home, and they all of a sudden they start hearing Betsy in her bedroom screaming. So they run upstairs. Richard is the first one. He wants to be Mr. Save the Day. So he runs up there and he grabs the door. He tries to open the door and he can't get it open. And finally he's able to use all of his force. He opens the door and they see Betsy on the bed like this, being slapped back and forth. She's trying to defend herself. And they said all of a sudden her arm was ripped away from her and her head was jerked to the side. And when that happened, they said they all heard an audible loud slap across her cheek. And as soon as the slap happened, every single candle in the house went out simultaneously. So they are dealing with something very powerful, whatever this is.
And how many witnesses were there to that?
It was the whole family and Richard Powell.
Mm-hmm. Now, was Betsy not engaged or was being courted by another person who was closer to her own age?
She was talking to a guy, I believe his name was Joshua Gardner. And there's a lot of interplay between Joshua Gardner and Richard Powell. But Richard Powell is someone who was around for a lot of the haunting. And actually he writes an account later on of what happened to the Bells and things that he witnessed when he was there. So when this happens, when Betsy is slapped across the face and all the candles go out, whatever is there begins laughing maniacally, and they began to hear laughing fading into the night. So they have, this
Audible
thing knows
laughter.
Exactly what
Everyone
it's doing.
Hears this.
Yes. Everybody hears this, and this thing knows exactly what it's doing. So the Bells are like, well, clearly what we're dealing with is intelligent. So they were like, maybe we should try to communicate with it to see what it wants. So they start asking questions, and they start asking the entity to answer the questions with a series of knocks. So they ask questions like, how many rooms are in the house? The entity knocks 6 times because there's 6 rooms in the house. And then they would ask, so how many miles is it to town? And the entity would knock 7 times because it was exactly 7 miles to town. And then they asked how many enslaved people did they own? And the entity knocked 9 times because the Bells owned 9 enslaved people. So this thing somehow knows math. So they communicate with this thing like this for a long time. And then in early 1819, it actually begins speaking to them. But when it first starts speaking, it was speaking in the voice of Reverend James Johnson and mocking him. And the family,
mock the good Reverend, huh?
Mock the good Reverend. So,
and is that the Reverend that blessed the house?
That's the one that blessed the house.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Throw this in here real quick because Stacy's actually made a comment on here that she had said the Reverend had bad intentions as he was trying to cleanse the house and land, which will cause a poltergeist to become much more serious. So I wonder if that is the case and why it progressed the way that it did. And when it starts to speak, it's now mocking him in his voice. So maybe his little Band-Aid that he tried to put on there, depending on
mocking his attempt to rid the world of me. I can rid the world of you.
Yeah, and his intent behind it, we don't know what his true intent was.
Well, we don't know what his true intent was, but the entity begins to call him Old Sugar Mouth. So maybe that means like he's like a silver-tongued devil or something. And he's just like,
I'm gonna start calling you Old Sugar Mouth, Ryan.
We got a question that's come up in the comments. It's a really good one. Actually, Ryan, I want to ask you: Did the Reverend go with the daughter in mind? Meaning, did he go to take care of her issue, or did he go to take care of the house?
That is a very good question. I believe he was just asked by John Bell to take care of everything, like kind of just like a cure-all.
Yeah, to kind of get rid of everything. It was a problem with the land. I believe it was originally
the land, the house, and everything. Yeah. So I don't think she was ever specifically blessed. I think just the land and the house were blessed.
Yeah, I don't think he said, "Come take the voodoo off my family." I think he said, "Come take the voodoo and the bad crap off my land and my house."
Because that's what I've read. While Betsy is being attacked, everyone is experiencing whatever this is. I mean, they're seeing her be attacked, but they're all hearing the dogs, the dragon chains, the knocks, and everything. So this thing starts to talk in the Reverend James Johnson's voice, and it would mock him and would call him Old Sugar Mouth. And then it would recite Bible verses in the Reverend's voice in a mocking tone. And then it would come back and would switch to a feminine tone and say, well said, Old Sugar Mouth. So this thing it knows that it was tried to get rid of. And it is mocking the family, like saying, hey, without saying it, you tried to get rid of me. I know what you did, and I'm just going to sit here and talk crap.
And being very flirtatious with a man of God who should be a very pious man.
And the thing is, so John Jr. is hearing this, and John Jr. gets pissed off, and he jumps up and he goes, "What are you?" And it replies to him, "I am the spirit of someone who was happy, but who has been disturbed." And then things kind of get calm for a few days. But when it comes back with a vengeance, because Betsy is actually is targeted again a few days later when she has a friend over, and the girls were sitting on their bed talking. Betsy is grabbed so hard and pulled backwards that her shoes fly off and they fly across the room. Her combs that were in her hair fly across the room, and the unseen force begins dragging her again and slapping her about the face and scares the absolute crap out of everybody.
What the hell Betsy do to that thing?
Like, she didn't do nothing.
I mean, you talk about being literally jerked out of your shoes like that. Yeah. That's some freaking force right there.
Yeah, that's some force. And jerked out of your shoes and thrown across the room pretty much, being drugged across the room, across the floor.
I think it bears mentioning because, right, you didn't mention this yet, that the Bells had a lot of children.
They did.
And Betsy was kind of like in the middle somewhere, right? She wasn't the oldest, she wasn't the youngest. She had three younger brothers and sisters and 4 older brothers. Were there 8 kids? I believe
the youngest at the time
was 5 or 6.
At the time was like 5 or 6,
right?
And she had a few older brothers and she had a few younger brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly. There were between 6 and 8 children, I believe.
Yeah.
And she was right in the middle, and there were other females. So why was she being targeted?
Well, I think it goes back to what we have seen over and over and over and over again in these cases is that she's around 12 years old when this starts, 13 at this point in the story, starting to be pushing into 14. She's going through puberty. She's going
through the change.
Through that change from young girl to adult woman. And that change we see in many cases as being not only physically volatile for the person that's going through it, but also an attraction for poltergeists, especially. A lot of your poltergeist cases have to do with young girls that are going through puberty. So I think that this is just another one of those cases, I think that's why she is specifically being targeted, because there's something about that
age range in
that
women.
Transition. Yeah. I think it's a transition. I think so too. Because it's at the point where it's young girl to adult woman. That is a very chaotic time, not only in and of yourself, but with everything that's kind of going on around you. And so I think that inner turmoil and outer chaos attracts that level of activity.
And like we've said before, like if you look at so much paranormal activity, when a lot of people are experiencing paranormal activity, there's some sort of change, there's some sort of turmoil, there's a lot of things going on that somehow attracts that and somehow produces that. And be it like remodeling a house, be it someone going through puberty, be it somebody going through like financial problems or family problems. Like sometimes these things are just attracted to chaos and just add on top of this. And what they are, the jury's still out. No one, we don't know if they're something produced by the people going through the chaos, or if it's something that's attracted to it and is like feeding off of it. We don't know. But this happens, and one of the neighbors of the Bells is a man named Frank Miles, and he starts hearing about all this. And he's a family friend. He's a really good family friend. He's actually a local tough guy. He is a big barrel-chested, 6-foot tall dude. And he is very brave, but also very stupid, because he hears about this and he's like, you know what? I'm tired of this thing, messing with my neighbors, messing with my friends. I'm going to go fight this thing. This thing is going down today. Like so he decides.
Wasn't he like a big burly dude too? Like almost like 6 something. Like,
so he was
like
6 foot,
7,
barrel chested, just a big ass,
and like 300-pound dude. This is a linebacker dude.
Yes, and he is a rugged frontiersman, because this guy is living out on the frontier right now. Because like I said, Tennessee's the frontier. That's as far west as we've gone so far. And this guy is living in uncharted territory, farming and doing whatever. He's just
he ain't afraid of no ghosts.
No, he ain't afraid of jack shit. He's like, and I'm gonna go fight this damn thing.
I'm gonna go whoop this guy's ass.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
No, bad idea. Very bad idea.
Bad idea.
So he goes over to the Bell house. And he starts talking to the Bells. He's like, look, this thing's bothering y'all. Leave it to me. I'm gonna go get it. So he walks up into the house. And he walks up and he screams out to the spirit that it better stop, or he was going to punch it back into perdition. And
he's like, "Come at me, bro."
Yeah, that's the ultimate. Come at me, bro. Right here.
I'm going to punch you back into perdition.
Yeah, and the spirit's like, "Oh yeah, you think so?" And then slaps the shit so hard out of Betsy that she spun around in her chair and fell to the floor.
Someone else provoked and someone else got the consequences.
Yes.
Shocker.
So Frank Miles sees this and he runs across the room to grab, because he's like, okay, this thing's in front of Betsy. So he runs across the room and starts grabbing at whatever's there, and he's grabbing air. He's not catching anything. And then this thing, what?
Nothing. I just got this image of this big burly 6-foot tall
just
son
going,
of a bitch.
Yeah.
Just
come on,
like those old Bugs Bunny cartoons from when he goes to grab it and Bugs Bunny goes. He's like,
yeah. Sorry, it just hit me in my head.
How about be? So he hears a chair move behind him, and so he's like, it's behind me. So he turns around and he lunges into the air to try to grab this thing, and misses whatever it is because it ain't there, and crashes right through a chair and like busts the chair up in the Bell's kitchen.
He's like a bull in a china closet.
Yeah, pretty much.
And he runs around and he starts trying to grab at this thing all night long, and he can't never catch it. So they all get tired and they're like, well, obviously Frank ain't going to catch this thing. Let's go to bed.
So, we'll just leave Frank alone. He'll get tired eventually.
Well, whatever.
I would have loved to have been on there. Get it, so Frank. Go for it.
So Frank gets tired of chasing. Frank goes to bed. Everybody goes to bed. Everybody's laying in bed. And while Frank is in bed, the witch pins Frank down so hard. The spirit pins Frank down so hard that the bed sheets ripped. This thing is like on top of Frank and rips the bed sheets because Frank's trying to fight his way out of it. You know, he ain't. You know, he's not. He's a big fella. He ain't nobody to mess with.
He ain't no punk ass bitch.
No,
that's right.
So Frank starts fighting this thing, and he gets himself out of the covers. And he's like, I'm not sleeping in the bed because that damn thing's going to try and pin me in the bed again. So he goes and lays under the bed, and the family finds him asleep under the bed the next morning. So
I would be afraid the spirit would drop the bed on me.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what his thinking was, but I guess maybe he was like, well, it can't get me under here. So he went under there.
Shelly, he's taking your idea of magic covers to the extreme. That's all it is.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, because covers are magic.
So Frank gets up that morning.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, so Frank gets up that morning and he's like, I'm going to go to town. I'll be right back. And the family's like, okay. So he goes to town, and I can't fault his logic here. He goes and he buys a bag of flour because he's like, if I can't see this thing, I'm going to cover this thing in flour so I can see it, and I'm going to get it.
Okay.
And so, actually, that is still a paranormal trick used today. You put a little flour or something on the floor that's, and you see if you can get footprints in it, you know, for like, or see if something goes through it. That's still something you say. So, hey, can we credit Frank for that?
I was going to say, Frank's got 1 point right now the witch or entity has like 20 on him. But anyways, one point for Frank. I give him that.
That's very ingenious thinking for the time.
Pretty smart. Okay.
I mean, if you can't see it, let's throw something on it and make it, you know.
He said, I will see it, and I'm going to punch that sucker back to perdition. So Frank goes to the store, he goes to town, comes back with a bag of flour, and starts challenging this thing. And this thing is like challenging Frank, and Frank and him are this thing going back and forth with each other. So Frank starts throwing flour everywhere to try to cover this thing so he can see it.
Lucy Bell is going, God, I'm going to have to clean that shit up later.
Well, as a matter of fact, she's the one who asked Frank to stop. And she's just like, hey, could you stop? You're just getting flour all over the place. And obviously you ain't covering nothing. So could we please quit? And so Frank, defeated, is like, okay. So he turns around to leave. The witch calls him stupid and kicks him in the butt and kicks him out the back door. So
this entity's got a little bit of a smart assery sense of humor, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. This thing, you know, I mean, there are stories of it actually entertaining people as well. When people would come to visit, like telling stories and telling jokes and entertaining people.
You know what? If I walk into your house and all of a sudden I'm hearing somebody's voice and it ain't your Alexa and there ain't nobody else in the room, I'm leaving. I'd be like, I don't know what the hell's going on up in here, but no, thank you. No, ma'am.
So after Frank gets kicked out the back door and he's defeated, word starts to spread around the community that the Bell's got something going on. You need to go check this thing out. So people start coming from all the surrounding communities to come and see the haunting. Now, weirdly enough, John Bell welcomes these people into his home and puts them up, lets them sleep there, feeds them, and never asks for a dime. And I think that might add a little bit of legitimacy to what's going on, because I think John Bell just wanted people to see, hey, this is what's happening to me and my family. We're not hucksters. We're not telling you a lie. Right. We just want people to come and check this thing out. But
John Bell wasn't always an honest person either.
No.
True. Very true.
But I think that
I never took any money. Yeah, I'll tell it somewhere else, Nixon.
Yeah. But like everyone who was interviewed, from what I understand, never said they gave John Bell a dime. He would I believe he would actually refuse money because people would try to give him money and he was like, no, I don't know. Just keep your money. So you start having visitors come to the house, and they're from all over the place. And when visitors would actually come into the home, the witch would put on a show, and the visitors would start asking the witch, where are you from? And depending on who asked, the witch would always give a different answer. But most of the time, the witch would say to them, where do you think I'm from? Who do you think I am? and would just always dodge the question, wouldn't ever really give them any solid answers. So one day, a reverend named James Gunn shows up, and he is sitting in the house, and the witch is talking to him. So he stands up and he goes, I don't think you know what you are. And the witch says to him, I know exactly who I am. I was one of the first white men to explore this region. And James Gunn is like, okay, then prove it. And the witch says, all right, I'll prove it. I have treasure buried on this property under a giant rock. Send 2 people out to this giant rock to find this treasure, but only these 2 people. And the witch names Drury Bell, who was one of the Bell children, and Bennett Porter. Now, Bennett Porter was a man who had actually come, who was another neighbor who had stayed one night. Bennett Porter's in bed one night, and the witch climbs into bed with him. So Bennett Porter decides he's going to seize this opportunity, throws the sheet around the witch, traps it in the sheet, and tries to throw the witch into the fire. But as he got closer and closer to the fire, he said what was in the sheet got heavier and heavier and heavier, and whatever was in the sheet slinked away from him and ran out the door. So,
matter of fact, I think he said it was obviously felt like the dead weight of a human at first, and it was writhing and wriggling around and all that stuff. But as he got closer and closer to that fire, that he felt the body change from something that was human-like to something with more scales and became more slithery. And so he ended up dropping it and letting it go and running from the house, and it disappeared. Is I believe what his account of it was that it transitioned from some type of human or humanoid figure into more of a snake-like something.
Yeah. So who knows what this thing is at this point? No,
yeah,
I don't want to deal with a giant snake. I'm good on that. So the witch says that only Drury and Bennett Porter can go dig this up. Now, I think the witch, as you will see, has ulterior motives for making these 2 go dig it up. So they go out there. They go to where the witch said that there was treasure. They push the rock back. They start digging, and they're digging, and they're digging, and they're digging all afternoon. And, of course, they find absolutely nothing. So, defeated, they go back to the home. And when they walk into the house, the witch immediately begins laughing at them and begins mocking them for actually going and doing what the witch told them to do. And anytime they would say anything to the witch would mock them and whatever the men said back to the witch. And then, to add icing onto the cake, anytime a new traveler would show up, the witch would tell the story about how she sent Drury Bell and Bennett Porter to go dig up something that wasn't even there.
Again, this whole thing about the telling the stories, this is the one thing that confuses me the most about this particular story. So people are walking in, sitting down by the fire, and like just all of a sudden they start hearing these voices. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah,
that they would just hearing
they would just
voices
come
and
that is the interpretation.
Doesn't anybody think to get up and go look around and go, where in the hell is that coming from?
That's the interpretation that I've taken from it as well, is that they would just come into the house
and something would start yapping.
Yep, something would just start yapping, and would just start talking. This thing loved attention. I mean, that's one thing about throughout the whole story, that if you ever read the actual story itself, this thing wanted to be acknowledged and loved attention. And I honestly think that the amount of attention it was paid is the reason why it was so powerful and was able to do what it was able to do.
Something and you feed it and it gets stronger.
And this thing got really strong.
Yeah.
So, you've got Bennett Porter who tried to throw it in the fire, and the witch is like, I'll fix you. I'll make you go dig, and you ain't going to find nothing. And
the Bell Witch is a dick.
Yeah, it's a vindictive asshole is what it is. So, all these people from the area, that they're coming in and out of the Bell's farm. And one night this Englishman shows up. He's like, I'm in the area. I'm traveling the United States. I want to see this thing. I've heard about this in the area, and this is something I need to see this. So John Bell's like, yeah, come on in. You can stay with us. If you want to see this thing, it's here. And the Englishman goes into the house and starts telling John Bell, how he misses his family. And he's telling stories about his family all night. And then the family goes to bed. And as the Englishman is laying in his bed, the witch begins talking. But the witch is talking in the voices of his parents, who are all the way in England. He hears them have a whole conversation about how they wish he would come home. But it's the witch talking in his parents' voice. And
so
he said,
have mimicry going on.
Yes. And he said those were his parents' voices that he heard. Now, this is 1820s. I mean, this is 1810s, 1820s in Tennessee. There ain't no telephone. There ain't no record. You know, how is this thing mimicking his parents' voices enough to the fact where he's like, because he gets up the next morning, he's like, I got to get back to England, and he leaves. And as a matter of fact, when he gets back to England, he sends a letter to John Bell saying that his parents started experiencing paranormal activity when he was gone. And yes, and that's all he really says. He doesn't really go in depth. I couldn't find anything more in depth, but it's just kind of interesting that he hears their voices, and while he's hearing their voices, they're experiencing paranormal activity in England.
And we have had that happen at a location where when we are there, it messes with someone that is close to us while they're somewhere else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the locations that has demonic activity. That's very interesting. So now we have mimicry. We have something mimicry that is able to make audible sounds. We have something that is able to physically harm Betsy specifically. And we
This thing just gets more interesting all the time the more you read about it. So whatever it is, who knows?
And the thing is being fed lots of attention.
Being
and
fed
enjoys
a lot of attention.
it.
Yes, it does. Very much so.
Okay.
Like there's a story, I didn't put it in my little treatment, but there is a story about how this thing was able to recount sermons given at churches miles away, word for word. So
that can quote scripture.
Very true.
Absolutely. So, you know, not everybody that's going to show up to the Bell's house believes in the Bell Witch. And one day, this detective from Baltimore hears about this. And he's like, I'm going to prove that they are lying and they are a sham. So he travels his ass all the way the 800 miles from Baltimore by horse and buggy. There ain't no railroads either at this point. I mean, it's you have to make an effort to get out to this place. He travels 800 miles to their home, and he is determined that he's going to expose the Bells. He arrives at their home and tells John Bell to his face, "You are a sham. I am going to expose you." And he says, he says that he was a master at detecting illusions and trickery. And so he's like, I know what's going on. I'm going to expose you. You just wait and see. So the first night he's there, nothing really happens. And he's real contentious, real like an ornery type of guy. And the next night he's there and he's asleep in his bed. And all of a sudden he is held down in his bed, punched about the face and scratched across the face. And then the voice of the Bell Witch says to him, "Mr. Detective, which of the bells do you think is upon you right now?" And the Bells hear this. And so the Bells get up and they go and running into the room to see what's going on with the detective. And he's being held down and he actually glares at the Bell family. And the witch says, "Don't blame them. Go sit in that chair like a good boy and maybe I won't knock your head off." So the detective does as he's told and goes and sits in that chair all night long and does not move. And as soon as morning comes, he gets on his horse and rides back to Baltimore, never to be heard from again.
Takes his happy ass right back to Baltimore.
Freaking deuce. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope.
Bye.
Nope. I'm good. I'm good.
And now, so up until this point, the witch has primarily been focused on Betsy. John's been bothered too, but Betsy's been taking the brunt of the assault by the witch.
Yeah.
So from here on out, John is going to be the focal point of the witch after this Baltimore detective incident, because shortly after this incident, John begins to become the witch's target. And he starts to experience stiffness of the tongue, and he starts to experience twitches. And he says it feels like an oral pain, where he says it feels like someone has put a pointed stick crossways across his mouth that's jabbing into his gums, and his tongue just won't work. And he experiences these spells quite a lot. Until his death, he experiences these spells. And he thinks that the witch has cursed him, and this is why he's experiencing this. And
stiffness of the tongue.
Stiffness of the tongue, and just bad oral pain where he says it feels like a stick is jabbing him crossways across the tongue into his gums.
When I'm trying to figure out.
When did that symptom start showing up? Did it say?
After the detective left.
Well, I know, but like, I guess
I believe.
I was gonna say, where are we at in the story,
in the timeline,
so to speak?
I think we're in about 1819 at this point.
Okay.
Pretty much a year before everything gets real bad.
Okay.
So he starts experiencing this, and he thinks the witch has cursed him, and he would experience these spells for days and days on end, and would get better, and then it would happen again. Now, modern people think he may have been suffering from Bell's palsy because, like, he would get facial twitches, and but at the time, you got like a demon or a witch or whatever in the house. I mean, what else are you going to blame?
Sure.
Right. So, and Bell's palsy will paralyze, one side of your face or the other. And it looks like one side of your face droops.
Yeah, it's just very much,
yeah. Because you lose all ability to move it. Your muscles aren't working in there. So, yeah, I can see how you're right that could have been a symptom. But you said that he would recover from it. And
that's the thing. Bell's palsy you can recover from.
Yes, you can.
And then until one day it just decides to like hit you hard, and then
again.
It's like I've actually got a friend of mine who experiences bouts with Bell's palsy, and like for a couple months he'll be drawn up on one side, and then gradually like the muscles will relax and he'll be fine, and then if he gets super stressed out or something, like it'll happen again.
Yeah,
I have an extremely close person in my life that has bouts with it as well, and I mean it's
and I have a friend that has that too. So that's
the thing that seems to make sense. I mean, they can't examine him, because he's a skeleton now, but that's based on what he's describing happening to him. That's what a lot of modern scientists think is what has happened to John Bell. Like he's suffering from Bell's palsy.
There's a genetic marker for that, because if so, couldn't you test a relative to see if that's somewhere in their genetic?
You probably could. You probably could. I mean, if that's the case, but I don't know if it's genetic or not. I think
that's why I'm asking. Is there a genetic marker for it?
I don't know. I don't know if there's like a biomarker that they could. I don't know if that's been figured out or not. Through
it's
research or anything. Yeah,
I'm
not sure, but I don't know if I don't know. With it being that long ago, I mean, you would be at like at least the third great grandson at this point, or more down. I don't know how well that would carry over with that many generations. I was good at
is a genetic marker for it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I was good at genetics, but I wasn't that good to figure all that out.
Well, so he starts experiencing these bouts with whatever it is, and he thinks this is part of the witch's curse. And life kind of goes on. I mean, the witch is an everyday thing. They're dealing with this thing, talking and rapping and beating on things and slapping people. I mean, after a while, I guess it becomes sort of commonplace.
I think I'd have moved by then.
Things. Well, I'll get to that too, because that is not an option. So one day, John and his family are actually sitting in the house, and his sons had just come back from a trip. And so they're kind of sitting in the house, just kind of talking and everything. And it's at night, and they start seeing lights outside the house. So they all go outside the house, and they're looking, and these lights are dancing across the field, and they're just like mesmerized. And so they all sit there and watch it, and, and they're just like, wow, I don't know what this is, but this is interesting. And the lights stop. And at some point, I suppose Betsy Bell had slipped back into the home, because the family goes back into the home. And as they go into the home, they feel a cold breeze rush past them. John is pushed from behind and pushed straight to the ground. And the family hears Betsy screaming in her bedroom. So the family runs upstairs to see what's wrong with Betsy. And they said Betsy was trembling in her room. And they asked her what was wrong. And she said that she saw an entity walk into her room, sit on her bed, and the entity was on fire, but it gave off no heat from the flame. And this is the only time that I was able to find in the story that the witch was actually, or whatever it was visible, even if that was what it looked like in the first place, because this thing could have just manifested something to scare the shit out of Betsy.
I was about to say, because I didn't ever recall anybody ever actually having. That's interesting that you found that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ever recall anybody actually having a physical description.
Mm-hmm.
Betsy was the only one who allegedly saw it.
Yeah, she's the only one who allegedly saw what happened. And it's also quite interesting that it was Betsy who saw it, who happened to be the one to see whatever the entity was. And so John Jr. gets mad and he yells at the entity to go to hell. He's like, "Oh, you just go to hell." And
so John Jr. sees it too.
No, he hears.
No, I think he's reacting. I think he's reacting.
Yeah, his sister is scared. So, and like all this stuff happened, they all have seen the lights outside running across the field, which they thought initially was the slaves having a party, and so they kind of wanted to see what was going on. But
because slaves frequently had parties.
Yeah, there was no party. There was just whatever. There was no party. So I wonder if it was a distraction to scare Betsy, or whatever it was, because I mean the family.
So Betsy sees it, and like she sees it, and it appears to be on fire, but no heat coming from it. It comes and sits next to her on the bed. What happens to it after that?
Disappears, I guess, because
doesn't it go back to the fireplace and it dissipates?
I think so.
Okay, I was trying to remember exactly what happens, because it isn't like it just vanishes. There's some movement to it. And I believe it goes back to the fireplace, and it's like it moves across the room to the fireplace, and it's gone. But it doesn't go up the chimney like
no
would. No hose here.
But this thing is, like I said, like it scared his sister and it scared his family, and it just pushed his dad down. So he's like, "Oh, you just go to hell," and things stop for that evening. I mean, that's a lot of energy to have all those things happen at one time. You got the flickering lights, you've got someone being physically assaulted, and you have someone seeing an actual entity. Maybe this thing was tired.
And again, yes, maybe it had used all the energy it had, which is maybe why when the son yelled at it, "You go to hell," that everything stopped, because it was literally out of food. It was out of fuel.
It was out of energy.
Out of energy.
I mean, because it could have been storing up all that attention from all these travelers and stuff in order to manifest itself in that way, in order to scare the shit out of the family.
Right.
Now, a few days after this incident, Reverend Tim Gunn comes back to the farm.
Oh, Lord.
And he again asks the witch, "Who are you? What are you? Where did you come from?" And the witch tells him that it was old Kate Batts's witch, and that Kate Batts summoned this thing because she conjured it by dancing around a pentagram. So everyone from then on out believes that Kate Batts is the one that conjured the witch.
And this is the old sugar mouth reverend? The one that she messed up this...
Tim Gunn is the one that asked the witch to prove that it had been in the area, and he's the one that told about the treasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Reverend says, "Okay, well, if that's what you are, why were you summoned?" And the witch says, "To torment her enemy John Bell to his death." So
to his death.
Yes. Oh. So from then on out, everybody was like, Kate Batts conjured this witch to kill John Bell. Now, one thing I will say that I did find in other research is that Kate Batts and John Bell actually didn't really have that much of a contentious relationship. Like, the stuff happened and it kind of just...
They kind of worked it out.
They kind of worked it out. Whatever. So...
I'm just also going to just throw in there just real quick. This entity is saying a lot of stuff and telling a lot of stories.
It is.
That... I don't know. I have a hard time with it. I ain't gonna lie. I have a hard time with it. I'm kind of debating that portion of it because, I mean, as investigators.
Yeah. How hard is it to get the entity?
Yeah. I mean,
right.
We get the occasional, hi or get out or,
and this one's doing a freaking fireside chat every night.
But it's never told us, where the treasure is buried, or anything like that. Like, so I don't know. No. I don't know.
That's my hang up too, is the fact that this entity decides it's going to put on its party pumps and entertain.
Yeah. It's so chatty with everybody.
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead. Sorry. I didn't mean I had to get that out because it seems like every person that walks in, it's like a full-blown conversation, like what we're having right now, and I'm like,
this is the best thing these people got. They don't got TV. This is the next best thing they got right now.
I guess so.
Let's go talk to the Bell Witch.
The witch says that old Kate conjured her up, or conjured it up, or whatever it is. So it's at this point, it's a white settler. At this point, it was one of the white men to explore the region. At this point, it's been conjured by a pentagram and Kate Bats. What is it? It won't give a straight answer. So John, tired of all this, says, well, I'll just leave the farm. And the witch told him that she would follow him to the ends of the earth if he decided to leave. So John does not have the option to leave.
So this thing
is threatened to follow him.
So now this is an attachment at this point. Now it's not so much a curse or a haunting or a poltergeist. Yes. It's an attachment at this point.
At this point, it's an attachment. So John's neighbors, they know what's going on, and they began to feel sorry for John because John's not getting any sleep because this thing is just keeping him up late at night. So some of the neighbors would come by and engage the entity in conversation after Tim Gunn had come by and found out what it was and what it said it was, because they're like, look, John don't get no sleep, and John is actually pretty old at this point, and they're like, John will get no sleep, so we'll just go by and talk to this thing, so it'll take some of its focus off of John, and we can see what we can do. So they would engage the witch in conversations so John could sleep, and they noticed that John's health was getting worse because John was being kept up by this witch, and on top of his Bell's palsy, he just started to develop contortions, like his arms would contort. So this thing is, and we know that Bell's palsy, stress is one of the factors in it. And this thing is stressing him out so bad that his face is locking up and he's contorting and twitching and everything else. And one of the neighbors that decides to come by and talk to the entity is our old buddy, Frank Miles. He decides to come back. He's going to try a different approach. And when he's talking to it, trying to reason with it, the spirit tells him that John needs killing and that it's not going to quit.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Do you think the entity was trying to enlist him to do that?
I don't know.
To persuade?
Could be. And then the next day, John claims he had the worst oral pain that he had the entire time that this had been going on. So this thing is actively trying to kill him. It has said he needs killing, and this pain is getting worse for John. So Frank talks to John, and he's not aware that the Reverend had, John, this exchange with John and the Reverend, hey, I'll leave, well, I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. So Frank talks to John, and he's like, look, why don't you just leave the area? Frank is slapped out of his chair, and the witch threatens that if John leaves, it would follow and make everything worse for John. So John is stuck. So that's 2 times this witch has said, you can't leave. I'll follow you. I know where I will come with you. You can't go anywhere. So while witch is attacking John hard, more so than he's doing anything to Betsy at this point, the witch actually starts to become somewhat of a protector for Betsy and starts being nice to Betsy. Kind of just switches its modus operandi to helping Betsy out.
Mm-hmm.
So in the May of 1820, the witch actually, there's a storm, like Betsy and her brother are out on the property. They're kind of far back on the property, and a storm blows up. And the witch guides Betsy and her brother the safest route back to the home to keep, because the trees are blowing over and things are falling over, and it guides her brother back to the home in the middle of the storm so they can get the hell out of the storm. And then shortly after this incident, Betsy and her friends, who are children around the property, are exploring the infamous cave that is on the property in the area. Now, and this is the cave that will become later known as the Bell Witch Cave, and this is where people think the Bell Witch presides today, because this is the cave that was on the Bell property. So they're in the cave, and one of the kids kind of strays away and gets away from Betsy. And the kid goes down one of the passages, and the passage collapses. It collapses on top of the kid. So the kid is nowhere to be found, and Betsy's looking for him, and all of a sudden they hear a voice say, "Don't worry, I'll go fetch him." And the boy, who is under the weight of all this dirt that has fallen on top of him, says he felt something grab him by his ankles, pull him out of the dirt, and carry him to the passage in the cave where he could get out. And Betsy claims that the witch is the one that rescued the boy while she was with them. So the witch is being nice to Betsy at this point.
We've now done a complete 180.
Yes.
The targeting has changed.
Yes, it's now all focused on John. It's not focused on Betsy anymore.
Whereas before it had been primarily Betsy with John thrown in, and now it's not
John,
really Betsy, and John's now the new focus. That's unusual.
It is very unusual, and I'll kind of get into this later why I think this is it. But
okay.
So shortly after this happens, they get a visit from a very prominent figure in American history. They get a visit from General Andrew Jackson. Now,
allegedly.
We'll get into that.
Allegedly.
So they get in they get a visit from Andrew Jackson. And, Jackson actually knows a couple of the bellboys. A couple of the bellboys actually served with Jackson in the War of 1812. And he starts hearing about, because he's living in Tennessee at this point, and he starts hearing about some of the trials and troubles that the Bells are going through, and he has to go see it for himself. He's like, I want to go see this for myself. I know these boys. I want to see what's going on. So he shows up in a horse and buggy with an entourage. He has a bunch of people who are hanging on, following him around. And they get on the Bell property. And as they're on the Bell property, the horse-drawn carriage stops, and the horses refuse to move. And the guys get out and they're pushing. The carriage is just stopped, like the wheels are locked up. They can't get this thing to move. And Andrew Jackson takes it in strides, and he starts laughing, and he says, well, boys, perhaps the witch has already come to visit us. And then they heard a female voice say, see you tonight, General. And the wagon began to move.
Ooh.
So maybe the witch stopped Andrew Jackson's wagon train.
See you tonight, General. Hey.
You'll see me tonight. So they get to the house, and Andrew Jackson has one of these guys in his entourage that's just crazy and wants to impress everybody. So this guy says that he has a silver bullet and he would shoot the witch. And he jumps up and he's like starts bragging, talking about how he's going to fight this witch and shoot this witch. And Andrew Jackson's like, hey, jackass, sit down, shut up. And then the witch shows up because it's been threatened. And it says Andrew, because the guy said he threatened to shoot the witch.
Now it takes physical form.
It does not take physical form. They hear a voice.
Oh, they hear
the witch says,
look at this voice.
Here I am, General, as promised, and ready for business. And that business would be that old windbag, talking about the guy that just threatened to shoot it. Well, the guy who threatened to shoot it is cowering. He's scared because he's challenged this thing and it showed up. So the witch begged him to shoot it. It's like, come on, you won't do it. Shoot me. I bet you won't do it. And so
where the hell is he going to aim if there isn't any physical form? Like
in the direction of where the voice is coming from. So he shoots at whatever he thinks is the witch.
Yeah.
He
doesn't
hit
be doing
anything.
that. The president's there. President Andrew Jackson's there.
The witch then, whatever the witch is, then picks him up, slaps him across the face, drags him around the room, and flings him out the back door of the house.
Damn.
And stay out.
And so General Jackson's men that are with him are like, hey, can we leave? You just saw what happened to Bud. Bud just got thrown out the back door. And Jackson's like, no, we're staying overnight. And the people who were with Jackson reported, because they were camping on the Bell's lawn, they reported being harassed and taunted all night long by the Bell Witch while they were trying to sleep. So the next morning they get up, they pack their shit, and they leave. And Andrew Jackson was quoted as saying, I would rather face the whole British Army again than face the Bell Witch again.
I remember that part of the story. Allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, let's just be honest. There's no documentation anywhere that states or shows that he actually went out to the Bell farm.
There is no documentation
and stayed.
Of Andrew Jackson's journals. And again, he was a president at the time, and everything he did would have been written down. It would have been chronicled. Right?
I believe this was before he was. This was right before he was president. He was still a general. Yeah, he was still known. He was General Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
People knew who he was.
And I think that there would have been some mention somewhere else, either with the gentleman he was traveling with, or somewhere in his own journals, because he wrote everything down.
And we know from history, Jackson liked to fight people. And if he won a fight or there was a fight, he was going to tell somebody about it.
He'd have been I fought the Bell Witch. That would have been written down somewhere.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character throughout history.
He's fascinating.
He is fascinating. Not the best man in the world.
No,
but
he's
fascinating
quite the ass. But
yeah, he's quite the
interesting.
asshole. But he's very interesting. And yeah, if he would have done that, it would have been written down somewhere. Like even I remember I was watching a documentary. Even the Hermitage went through all of his stuff, where which is his house outside of Nashville where he lived. Went through everything. They dug through every possible document that they had, and there was never anything that they found where he said he encountered any sort of anything paranormal or anything like that. So, did it happen? Who knows? But after this visit in October of 1820, things get to be really bad for John, as if they aren't bad enough. John had been sick in bed for weeks with the swelling from like his twitching, and his tongue swole up. He was twitching and he was writhing, and he had been in bed for weeks. But this one day in October, he feels good enough that he's going to get out of bed. He's going to go with his son. He's going to go work in the hog pen with his son. So John goes into the hog pen, and something shoves John from behind with enough force to knock him out of his shoes. And his shoes fly across the hog pen with his son. This happens 3 times to John. John has to get up, walk barefooted across hog shit and mud to go get his shoes back on. And every time he get his shoes back on, something shove him down and his shoes fly off again. And this happens 3 times to the point where John just like, I give up. I don't know what the hell to do. So he goes and sits down on the stump and begins crying and begins twitching and writhing even more because imagine the stress level you have at this point when you can't see what's doing this to you. And every time you put your shoes back on, this thing shoves you back down in the mud.
I think I'd leave my shoes off.
So John begins to cry as he sits on his log, and John's son takes him, picks him up, walks him back to the home, and puts John into bed. And John stays in bed for 2 months. The whole time he's in bed, they hear the witch screaming, singing, and laughing at John and mocking John while John is asleep or trying to sleep in his bed, trying to recover. And in December of that year, they find John unconscious in his bed. And the family realized that during the night, John had died. And John's son discovers a vial of black liquid sitting on the nightstand next to John's bed. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody had seen this vial of black liquid. And when it's discovered, the witch chimes in and said that she had given John enough during the night to quote unquote fix him. And John dies on April the 29th, 1820. Now, this mysterious black liquid shows up. John's dead. The boys decide, well, we're going to test this liquid. And unfortunately, poor kitty cat, they give this liquid to the kitty cat in the house. And the cat drops dead on the floor.
What the hell did cat ever do to them?
Nothing. I'm
telling y'all.
I'm a cat man. I love cats.
This is like week 4 of something with a dog or a cat or an animal or something. Y'all need to find new stories or something.
We can't help it if these stories have dead animals in them.
So John is buried, and the witch shows up to John's funeral. And the witch sings songs and yells and screams and laughs and cackles as John is lowered into his grave. And after that, the witch just kind of fucks off for a while. She had accomplished her goal. John's dead at this point. It kind of fucks off. She's gone. She's gone for a while. And so Betsy ends up marrying Richard Powell and ends up moving to Alabama, if I'm not mistaken.
Wait,
it was Alabama.
It stops for Betsy too.
Oh no, it don't stop. I'll tell you that in a second.
Oh, I was thinking in the time that John Bell died, it just kind of stopped because Betsy now she can get married.
It stops at this particular point, but other things begin to happen.
So it just kind of
it calms down. John Bell is dead. This thing has accomplished its goal. John Bell is gone.
Yeah.
Betsy marries Richard Powell, lives a happy life, moves to Alabama. And the rest of the Bell family stays behind at the Bell farm. And about 7 years after John's death, this thing shows back up and gets back to its old tricks, beating on walls and talking and stuff. And at this point, the family just ignores it. They're like, you know what? We've gone through enough of this damn thing. No more. And after a while, it just leaves it alone. Like it just leaves and doesn't bother anyone. But where did it come from? This is some information that I found And I think this is going to blow y'all's mind on this. So
this is what we told him not to tell us until the podcast, Blake.
Yes. 12 years after Richard Powell and Betsy marry, they began hearing knocks on their walls and windows and doors and on the roof, similar to that of the Bell Witch. So Richard takes Betsy to a hypnotist. He's like, I'm going to nip this in the bud. This ain't happening at my house. Screw this. Takes Betsy to a hypnotist. And while under hypnosis, the hypnotist asks Betsy about the origins of the Bell Witch. And in the witch's voice, Betsy says that the witch had been created to protect her from John Bell when she turned 12 and he began molesting her.
And I have actually already heard that.
So they ask the entity who's speaking through Betsy at this point why it targeted Betsy so much. And the entity said that it targeted Betsy so much because Betsy would not tell on her father. And in a way, it was Betsy punishing herself for not telling about what happened to her. And then under hypnosis, the entity said that it possessed Betsy to make a nightshade tincture and administer it to John Bell in his bed when everyone else was asleep. And that is what killed John Bell. Although Betsy will not remember any of it because the witch said it possessed Betsy to do so. After that session, the Bell Witch never bothered Betsy or Richard Powell ever again. And they lived a long and happy life. Now, question I have for you two. Poltergeist or Tulpa? Did she create an entity that protected her? Because people still say on the Bell property, they encounter some sort of entity to this day. And you know, when you create a Tulpa, whatever, or a thought form entity, after you create it, what it does is on it. You can't control what it does. So that could explain why whatever if people are encountering on the Bell Witch farm today is still there. So what do you think? Do you think that it was just a manifestation of her energy because of her age and because of what was going on with the poltergeist activity? Or do you think she actually created something to harm her father? What do you think?
Well, because I'm going to be sorry. I had to think about it for a second because I had forgotten about the part where when she was 12, unfortunately with molestation and all that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that portion of the story. When you just said that, I was like, I remember actually hearing that before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around or leaning towards the fact that she herself created something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's me.
So do you think it was an entity that was already on the land that was attracted to what was happening?
I think that is that's where my brain goes to, is that it was either something that was something that was already on the land or attached to the land, attached to the area. I don't think that it was anything that was conjured and or summoned, because if you're trying to conjure and or summon, I don't believe you can have control over those entities. When you conjure or summon and you knock on that door and the door opens, it's there and it's there to do whatever the hell it wants to do. You know, that's kind of my belief. If you're talking along the lines of real nasty, evil shit, you know, I mean, it's just there to do what it wants to do. But I also have a real hard time believing that she created it. So I think that I would lean more towards the fact that it was something that was there. I think it was something that was there that was attracted to what was either happening in the house or the transitional period of a young girl into woman adulthood.
And I'm going to take exactly the opposite opinion.
Okay.
Because I think and Ryan, whenever you and I kind of talked about this ahead of time on the phone, I was kind of laying out to you. If you have someone who is dealing with a terrible, terrible trauma, something that they can't escape. Let's take last week, for example. Last week's little Gypsy Rose Lee, you create this fantasy land, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Yeah, excuse me. You create this fantasy land and this thing where you're safe, your own little bubble. And I think I think that if there had been a problem with the land, that perhaps there might have been some inkling beforehand. Even though this was again in the Wild West, but there were already people living in Is it Adams?
Adams, Tennessee is where it's at.
Adams, Tennessee. And I think that there would have already been an issue. I think the fact that I kind of agree. I think that this was something that she brought forth, that she manifested out of her trauma, out of her pain, out of her need, if she truly was molested, to escape her, her tormentor. And I think that she felt a lot of shame, which is why initially it attacked her, that this was her shame. And this was all of, I'm being treated like this. And, if my father's going to treat me like this, why wouldn't something else treat me like this? And then finally, as she grew, she got stronger and she knew that this was wrong. And again, she never did tell on him. And that's when the aggression turned towards John. And now the brown liquid, that is something that they think that it was potentially oleander leaves or arsenic. Now, arsenic had been used in England already for a while. They were quickly trying to write, laws to put on the books to make arsenic poisoning illegal in England, but poisonings were happening. And I think it's more of a tulpa, a thought form. I think that she brought that forth in order to conceal her shame, but yet as something that could fight for the aggressor. And the reason I think that is because, Ryan, you said that whenever she went to the hypnotist, she spoke in the witch's voice.
Yep.
That voice came from somewhere. She knew things about the family, would tell things about the friends that showed up. And I'm sure she had heard the stories of the guy who came from England, probably mentioned his mother and father. And she was the one that was privy to everything that was going on. And that's how the witch could know what to say. The witch. I am.
So are you thinking that whenever the witch is speaking, that it is Betsy?
It's
speaking?
a manifestation from Betsy.
Okay, so you're still thinking that it's some type of
I think it's a thought form. I think
Mm-hmm.
that she created this, and unfortunately, once she brought it forth and gave it some kind of life through her own trauma and pain. Again, once you bring it forth, kind of like a golem, I believe that's in the Jewish faith, it's a golem, that you bring them forth, but you only got control of them for a very little amount of time, and then they kind of do whatever they want once they get fed and get strong.
It does what it wants.
And you don't have any control over it. That to me makes a heck of a lot more sense.
Now, and I'm going to agree with, I agree with Shelley, but Blake, I want to ask you the question. If not a thought form, what do you think it was? Was it an elemental? Was it a demon? What do you think it was?
I think that what ended up happening was that, as you said, in that moment of getting out there, that the area was Indian. There was Indian burial grounds out there.
Yes.
I know kids being kids and all that kind of stuff is one thing, and I can understand it to an extent. But I think that there's a whole different ball game that you're playing with when it comes to anything that has to do with Native American or anything like that, indigenous people or whatnot. And regardless of if it was just a kid being a kid, digging out back with some of his friends, whatnot, digging up into and disturbing a burial ground and taking a bone, which I'm actually being told in the comment was a jawbone. Did you find that out?
It was a tooth. Like, they took some. I read a skull and a tooth fell out underneath the house. Yeah.
See, I've heard different variations of it, but I'm being told in the comments that there was a jawbone. It's still one of those things. You disturb it. I don't fuck with indigenous Native American or whatever you want to label it. I don't mess with it. And whether regardless of whether it's a kid being a kid or somebody who's actually actively desecrating something that has to do with those customs and traditions, I think it has ramifications. And I think what ends up happening is that ended up bringing something forth, and I think tied in with what was going on, culminated into the haunting of the Bell Witch. I don't know why. I know why they call it a witch.
The only reason I would question you on that, Blake, would be that the fact is that if its true goal was to punish, then why would Betsy and her friends be let out of the cave, be pulled to safety? If it truly was the kid that had created the sin against the ancient burial mounds and had been actually the ones that were disrespectful. Now, who would have known their way back home, the shortest way back home, 13 or 14-year-old girl who'd probably run that property all the time. And who probably physically could have gotten one of her friends out of that cave? Probably her, and probably could have not even realized she was doing it. I would think that if they had truly pissed something off, I don't think it would ever have tried to help them.
I don't know. It just depends. And whatever happened to the bone? What's the ending of the story with the bone?
I do not know.
Nobody knows.
It could have been just put back. I mean, it could have been taken as souvenir. But I would think because they said that John and his family didn't really bother.
No, they knew not to bother that. Yeah.
And so I would think that if my son or daughter comes walking up to me with a tooth or a jawbone, I'm like, you go put that crap back.
You're not. What are you doing? Put that down somewhere. Yeah.
There's a room on your ass for that. So go put that shit back.
Well, I don't know. I think it comes down to, depending on what was actually taken bone wise, how many were taken bone wise, and all that stuff.
If there were even any taken.
If there were even any taken. If you do, I don't know. It's one of those things. If you're missing even one little scrape of a bone and it's not put back into place and a reburial process is not done correctly, I mean, you're going to be left with something.
But do you think that an entity would punish an innocent child? I don't think so.
No,
especially with no malicious intent.
No, but that's where I said I think that whatever they've opened up has combined with what is happening in the transitional process of a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl, because I go back to the Enfield poltergeist case and how that entity was doing all the damage, all the abuse to Janet, who was the 11-year-old girl, in that transitional moment. So do I think an entity would harm a 12 to 13-year-old child? Yeah. It's been kind of proven a couple of times. Not proven, but it's been alleged to have happened a couple of times. As for it helping them, who's to say it was that entity that helped them?
True.
She says it was the witch.
She says so. And two, what better of a red herring than an Indian burial ground? And also, this is Kate Batts. Kate Batts did this. What are you talking about?
That's right. And you gotta remember, Betsy would have knowledge of the fact that Kate Batts and her father at one time had a dispute.
Had a fight, yeah.
And what better way to, potentially get her father in trouble to bring this to light if it wasn't already known? Oh, it was Kate Batts. Well, you go asking Kate Batts. Kate Batts like, what are you talking about? We had a problem. He tried to cheat me, but we're over it. I mean, this would bring some kind of shame, because if you go ask Kate Batts was known to speak her mind and would have told you what the issue was between her and John Bell. Bring a little shame back to her father. Ryan, we haven't heard what your thoughts are. Me and Blake got into it.
No, like I
Ryan,
said,
I thought you and Blake were supposed to fight on this one, not me.
Like I said, I agree with you. I think that she had a trauma. She was, if what she told the hypnotist, she was being molested. She had to do something, and she felt powerless. So what better way than to create something to punish her father or to protect her from what was happening? And, like she said, like she punished herself too, because she wouldn't tell.
Well, she felt shame. I mean, that wasn't something you could, there wasn't,
and then creating that thing, and she could have done it subconsciously, not even consciously created whatever that was.
Yeah. I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah. What better, like I said, what better red herring than, hey, my dad has a land dispute with this woman who they think is a witch in the first place. So why don't we just not conjure the wrong word, but why don't we make this thing up? Why don't we give this thing life? And then if anybody asks, let's kind of dodge the question on where it's from. And then when finally, one of the reverends asks, oh, well, the neighbor next door, she's a witch. She conjured this thing. So that's a perfect cover story.
With a lady who was already not well liked,
who was not well liked. And I think that, like I said, I believe it's a tulpa. I believe she created it on her own. I believe that I believe that because it's still there, because if John Bell is in the ground and it accomplished what it wanted to do, why are people still experiencing things in the Bell Witch Cave when they haven't done anything? So whatever it is has gone to reside in that cave and is still haunting that cave to this day. Now,
I mean, it could be the fact that a bone never got reburied, and so therefore it took refuge in that, and so now it's already been desecrated once, and so now people who are walking in on its turf, it feels threatened, and therefore it starts attacking them and defending its territory.
I mean, that could be it. Now, something I will say about the Bell Witch Cave today: people who go and visit the Bell property, you can go and visit the Bell Cave. I would love to go visit. I think it'd be really interesting to go check it out. There are lots of people who visit the Bell Witch Cave today, and they will take rocks and they will take things. And we all know it is a bad idea to take anything from a haunted location.
People, stop stealing. Stop stealing.
If you want trouble, take something from a haunted location and see what happens to you. And they get rocks back in the mail with letters attached to them all the time, talking about, my cousin took this rock and then he went to prison, or my cousin took this rock and or my brother took this rock, or I took this rock and then someone got a limb amputated. And like, people who take things from here suffer bad luck, misfortune, and sometimes death. And
so what let me ask you this: what's the correlation? Because the cave is a relatively new thing in this story.
It's not the original part of the story.
It's not the original part of the story. So what is the not illusion. What am I trying?
Fascination. What's the fascination?
Well, no. How does it allude to the Bell Witch? How does the cave become the Bell Witch's story?
I think what it is
other than the boy being pulled out and led away. Other than that, what does the cave have to do with the Bell Witch?
It is one of the, I mean, it's not even really a structure, but it was part of the Bell's property. And people believe, local lore and legend, people believe that that's where the Bell Witch retreated to after she killed John, because people would experience strange things around that cave from then on out. So
there's no hard concrete evidence to tie the Bell Witch actually to that cave of what was going on in the house,
not really
evidence of
for anything. Oh no. I understand, but what I'm saying, where I'm getting to is basically saying we don't have a common thread coming from the cave over to the Bell's house, other than the cave being on the property and local lore legend that she retreated there after John Bell was dead. So what's to say, with it being part of a cave system that we love to talk about, that's not a separate entity in and of itself?
Could be.
You know,
I mean, it absolutely could be, but it just kind of correlates with the story. So I think people kind of attribute, you know.
Here you go, Shelly. One of our commenters said, or listeners said, Golem lives in the cave.
There you go. I probably said that wrong, but I say a lot of things wrong. So you know what I mean. Just roll with it.
But yeah, so I mean, that is something that is, to this day, people experience weird things on, and the cave is still on the original Bell property. So I think maybe people attack, you know, when it comes to the cave, because like you were saying, the cave only does appear in that story not very much, and maybe it could be separate. Now, some people think that the cave itself is actually an Indian burial ground, and they think that maybe that's what is going on in the cave. But what we do, and this is something I was going to bring up too, because like Shelly, you talked about it, where you said that what is in the story is not verifiable, because what we do know about this story comes mainly from the book called The Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, and this was written by a man named M.V. Ingram. And M.V. Ingram claimed that one of the Bell children gave him a diary that outlined what happened at the Bell Witch plantation. And he had this diary, and he would release this diary whenever the last Bell descendant died, who originally was on the farm when that happened. No diary was ever produced. Nothing ever came of that.
And how convenient, because then anybody mentioned, you couldn't question them.
No. And then also, he never, from what I understand, and I could be wrong on this, he did not ever actually interview any of the people who were directly involved with the Bell Witch. It was neighbors and it was friends, and it was correct. Not anyone that ever encountered this thing. Now, also, Richard Powell, who was Betsy's husband, wrote an account of what he experienced as well. So those are the two things that we have to go on. Now, with Richard Powell, I would be more apt to believe what he wrote versus what Envy Ingram wrote, because Richard Powell actually experienced it. But
well, and Richard Powell told something about his wife that was deeply personal. You don't talk about someone in your family's sexual molestation unless something like that really happened, and you would probably have to get their permission. That is something that is extremely personal, extremely, if something like that happened, you wouldn't want your hubby going around writing a damn book about it. It's like, you know what, that's personal. I'm finding my way through this. You shut your ass and let me work through it the way I need to work through it. Don't be putting me out on Front Street here. So the fact that, and she did give him permission to write this, correct? Or did he wait until after she passed to write it?
From what I understand, he wrote it because I read some of the book, and it was him telling his daughter about what happened.
So your children are going to read this. Why would you put something like that about their mother in there if that was not the truth?
Because in the beginning of the book, he was like, the story that you asked about from the time you were a kid, and we always told you that it wasn't real. Well, it was real, and here's the account of what happened.
Okay, so yeah, hold on. I'm gonna butt in real quick because I do have I have to point out something that we're getting comments. I want to introduce somebody who is on the comment thread right now. His name is Pat Fitzhugh. Okay. Pat Fitzhugh is I've watched many interviews with Pat Fitzhugh. Pat Fitzhugh. I apologize, Pat. Words are hard tonight. He's basically a local expert on the Bell Witch.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and he has asked Ryan. This is going to be a kind of question for you.
Okay.
Number one, who was the hypnotist? Did you get a name or
I did not.
Was it he says, was that conversation presumably in 1836 documented anywhere?
From what I understand, it's in Richard Powell's book.
Okay.
So it's Richard Powell telling the story.
And then you already made the statement that they had lived happily ever after once that was over and done with. He also comes back in. Pat comes back in and comments. He said, "Correct. It is not validated. The storyline that Ingram." I'm going to put this on the screen.
Okay.
Correct. Not validated. The storyline that Ingram invented was that the quote witch indicated that she was there because she was looking for that tooth. Later in the story, she retracted that claim and laughed about it. She was constantly claiming to be different things, then laughing at the Bells and friends because they were such quote suckers, as she called them. First off, Pat, I appreciate you commenting and jumping.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
I want to tell you something too. Ingram was a newspaper man.
Yeah.
And one of the things you wanted to do was you wanted to tell a good story. So I'm sure that was probably somewhere in your
something to do with it as well.
We're running a little, we're running a little longer than we normally do. But Ingram was a newspaper man, and he was, he needed to sell newspapers too. And there were times when newspapers would get into fights to sell and sometimes it became one of these things where it's who can tell the best story, not necessarily who could be the most accurate, but who can tell the most story and sell the most papers. So there is some speculation that perhaps that some of this could have been invented from Ingram, based on who he talked to, and then he says, and then he embellished it.
This is the one thing, though, about this story that I absolutely love, though, is that when you look at other kind of maybe historical haunts or historical paranormal experiences throughout time, with this one, everybody that is involved in this story, names and dates and places and all that stuff, in some form of documentation somewhere existed in the place at the time that the story is being told, which is huge in and of itself, because obviously
they're real life people. You can find every one of them.
Times are different from back then to now. They don't have the technology that we have now. And that's what adds a lot more of a little bit of validity for me about this story is the fact that it's every single name and every single person that's associated with this story existed where they were supposed to exist, when they were supposed to exist, and that's documented. And that's what I do appreciate about this story. That adds a little bit of validity to it for me.
Yeah, and now it is one of the most famous ghost stories in American history. You can visit Adams, Tennessee. You can go to the Bell Witch Cave and check it out. And something I did find that I thought was pretty interesting. There is a play that they do every fall that is about the Bell Witch, and descendants of John Bell and Kate Batts both act in the play together every year. So I thought that was kind of cool and kind of interesting. So if you ever make it out there, you can go check it out.
And wait a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. My apologies.
You're okay. No, go ahead.
I was going to tell you the other fun fact is that John Bell is one of the few people that, and I think maybe the only one, whose death has ever been attributed to a spirit. Isn't that correct? His cause of death is listed as.
I believe so. I have researched the death by spirits and stuff like that. To my knowledge, from what I was able to find and research, yes, as far as I know, his is the only death that is attributed to a spirit. As far as I know,
that's his cause of death, not poisoning, not Bell's palsy, not stroke. Go ahead.
Pat just said that Richard Powell wrote only one book, his ciphering book, 271 pages long. No mention was ever made about the Bell Witch. Only one entry was made about Betsy, the date they married, March 21st, 1824.
So what book were you reading, Ryan?
It's not the authenticated history of the Bell Witch. It was another one, and
it was that long. Was it that long title?
No, that was M.V. Ingram. This was another book.
Okay. It's like you sent me that title that was this long. I was like, what are you reading?
No, that was the authenticated history of the Bell Witch. This one was another book that was said to be written by Richard Powell.
I'm going to throw something out to you about the vial that he was supposedly the poison that I kind of researched into. Laudanum was big.
Oh, laudanum, yeah.
Or laudanum, sorry, laudanum, laudanum. Was big back in that time, which was around the time of I believe morphine being discovered and all that stuff. Anyways, it's basically opium. What I found interesting is they said that he was poisoned, and after they poisoned the cat, basically killed the cat, threw the vial into the fire, and the fire lit up blue flame, and basically that was the witch's, whatever you want, concoction, whatever you want to call it. So I looked into how laudanum is made. And I don't know if it's exactly the same, but what I found very interesting is it's made with a mixture of opium and alcohol, usually drank with whiskey. It was opium and ethanol is what I have found that it was made with. Well, ethanol burns blue. I found that to be pretty interesting because maybe it was one of those things that his symptoms that he was having, if he was self-medicating because it was readily available, if it might have been an accidental overdose. Just throwing that out there. Because
that's an interesting theory as well.
One thing that I also thought about was, okay, I took the paranormal hat off. I put the true crime hat on. Okay, just gonna play devil's advocate here. What do you do whenever somebody dies? You look at how they were murdered. All right. So the first thing I started thinking of is nobody else is getting these ailments in the house. So I can already wipe out person to person, airborne illness, waterborne illness, because close proximity, you breathe and drink the same stuff. Somebody else is going to have these ailments. What does that leave me with? Foodborne illness. Okay. Around this time, this is just me giving you reasonable doubt here. Okay. I'm going to be the defense attorney real quick. Around this time, one of the newest things that was probably coming to America at this point, because it was basically discovered in 1810, was a new canning process with unbreakable tin cans. What we know today is canned vegetables. Well, what's one of the most toxic things that happens with canned vegetables? Botulism. What are the symptoms of botulism? Facial paralysis, including the mouth, the eyelids, the drooping of the eyes, difficulty breathing, paralysis that moves down the body, muscle weakness, seizures, blurred vision, all of which he was said to have, or pretty much almost all of which he was said to have had.
I object, Mr. Smith.
I'm just throwing some things out here for you.
John Bell was the only one who had these symptoms. Continue on with your fabulous breakdown.
Betsy did not.
But what ends up happening if if there's like one special canned food that they're canning that John just really likes, and he's
you got a whole bunch of kids if you break open a can, they're going to slurp it till it's gone.
I'm just saying, it can happen.
That seems to me as if it was true crime. If we do put on a true crime hat, John Bell is definitely targeted because he is the only one that falls ill. He is the only one that seems to be suffering a physical ailment that ends up taking his life.
Well, I just thought it was fun to find all the synchronicities between what he was experiencing, what was happening at the time, like with anyways, it was just a fun little
I know you know I was ready for you though. I was ready for you.
So I mean, I think Tulpa. I think that's what the deal is. I don't know. I think we could debate it all day long because
we could.
We have for 4 hours or so on the phone.
Yeah, because there really is evidence to support what we're all saying, but who it is or what it is. The thing that I do know is it is a very, very good story. It is a very interesting story. I highly recommend you go to Adams, Tennessee and check it out. I myself would really love to do that. Hopefully one of these days there's a road trip out there to go check out the Bell Witch Cave. Do your own research, figure it out yourself. We'd love to hear what y'all think it is. Please.
And it's a fabulous story.
Yes,
absolutely. I'm gonna
idea what you think it is. Go ahead.
I'm gonna pitch it out to Pat, who's still in the comment thread. Pat, if you're down for an interview, we would love to speak with you.
Absolutely.
Love to talk to you, sir.
We would love to hear your take on this. We know that you're the local expert on the Bell Witch. I've watched some of the things that you've been interviewed on, and it's fascinating the amount of knowledge that you know, and it would be an honor to be able to sit down and speak with you on this subject.
I'd love to hear your story.
So that we could learn some more in-depth behind the scenes on it, I guess, so to speak, of what may or may not be more, public knowledge. So
yeah, because I would love to hear what you have to say. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
So, gentlemen, are we ready to close the book on this Bell Witch for now?
For now,
so.
we might have some more stuff coming up.
Tell them where they can find us then.
Well, we appreciate y'all joining us again for another episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. Remember, whatever social media channel you are watching us on, we are not just on that social media channel. We are across all platforms. We don't use the same thing for one reason, so you might miss out on something. But also,
you can find us on Patreon. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was ready for my cue, Blake, and I jumped you. I apologize.
Throwing it to you yet.
Sorry.
Anyways, if you'd like to join us on an investigation, we got a couple of investigations coming up that are on the books. We are selling tickets for Gregg County Historical Museum. Tickets are on sale. That is June the 11th. And then we also have the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas. That is October the 7th and the 8th. So if you'd like to join us on an investigation, head over to our Facebook. We'll repost the links tomorrow morning so that you can find them fresh and new. Shelly, take it away.
Thank you. And I apologize for jumping you. I was just so excited because I wanted to tell them about Patreon. You can become a Patreon member if you want to know what we really talk about. And I'd like to say it's the show, but it's not usually the show. Become a Patreon member. It's $5 a month. We have one tier. You get everything Spirits with Shelly, Bedtime with Blake, and Ryan's reviews. And all of our pre-broadcast conversations. And if you want to know what's the nuttiest thing you've ever done to an ex, tune in and find out. So, Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, so go on to Apple Music, rate us, review us, go on Spotify, also rate us, boost our signal. And the more you boost our signal, the more we can bring you guys. And then sorry, words are hard. But yeah,
we need that on a t-shirt.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. We're gonna be coming up with some merch pretty quick.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Thanks for listening to me prattle on about the Bell Witch for about 2 hours.
Well, y'all, appreciate y'all watching. For myself, I'm Blake Smith. My friends in the paranormal tonight, not true crime like it was last week. Miss Shelly Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts, and as always, we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.